Virtus Verbis Podcast disclaimer. The information presented in this podcast is for entertainment, informational and educational purposes only. It is not intended as legal, professional, or financial advice and should not be construed as such. Content and topics shown or discussed may not be accurate nor up-to-date information. Laws and regulations change frequently and vary by location, jurisdiction, and by nation. You should consult with a qualified legal or financial professional for advice specific to your situation. Listening to this podcast does not create an attorney-client relationship. The views expressed by the host and guests are their own and do not reflect the views of the podcast as a whole. The host is not responsible for any errors or omissions in the information provided or for any actions taken based on the content of this podcast. We are not liable for any losses, damages, or consequences arising from the use of this information. By listening to this podcast, you agree to hold the host and any guests harmless from any decisions you make, or from any losses, damages, or other claims arising from your use of this information.
Okay, so I think today we're going to be talking about collectibles, right? I think that's a very interesting topic, specifically when it pertains to, in this case, Bitcoin and why does Bitcoin have value, or why do collectibles have value, right? And I think one of the interesting things that we're both familiar with is the game of Magic the Gathering, right? And with that particular game, it's been around for a while. I'm pretty sure you know the history better than I do. I'll probably pass it over to you to talk a little bit about that. But what I want to dive into is more so the period where, from what I remember, there was a mass not necessarily mass exiting, but there were supposedly, from what I read a long while back, that there were crypto traders or whatnot that were taking their profits, and then they were then jumping into the Magic the Gathering market to buy up, rare collectible cards for that specific trading card game. So that's the direction I want to talk about, but I'll pass it over to you and see if you can fill us in a little bit about the history.
Sure. Yeah. So for those that might not be too familiar, just a little bit background. Magic the Gathering is a trading card game. So for its purposes, it was created by a person named Richard Garfield. I think back in the 1990s ish. And so at the time, it was basically a pastime for between games of Dungeons and Dragons, from what I remember. Now,
Right.
I know some Magic historians may have more information about that, but for our purposes, that's just kind of the background of it. How it's kind of been is it's always been a one-on-one game for most of what I can remember, with tournaments and different laddering events and things like that where people compete.
Right.
As of lately, what we're mostly into is the group play aspect, which is another format within this game called Commander. Why this is important is because as this card game, I guess, matures or changes over time, it attracts different people. And so, speaking to your point before about there was a mass exodus from crypto into Magic, one of the reasons why is because there's a lot of different formats, and within those formats, the competitiveness drives the price of these collectible cards, in so that it becomes valuable to certain people. And the main thing is, from what I can see, value of cards looked at by other players or in general is the power level, right? So the stronger something is, people want to buy those things. There's only certain amount of those things available in the market at a certain time.
Right.
So things go up and down in value because of how so quote unquote rare they are. And either until something gets reprinted, it stays like that. And there's collectors, there are people that play the game, and so there demands on multiple fronts. So that's kind of like a quick,
Right.
shoddy lowdown on
No, I think
how
that's
that
good.
kind of plays out.
Yeah. And I think it applies to other trading card games too, like Pokemon, right? I think one of those Logan Paul or Jake Paul or whoever, the
Yep.
one that does
Yep.
boxing, he's been seen wearing was it a Charizard or something? I'm not familiar with Pokemon.
That's right.
Around his neck when
PSA
he
10.
right, where
Yeah.
it's like encased in a protective case, and he strolls into the ring, and it's a very expensive card, right? Because of the fact that for one thing, it's extremely powerful. I think trading card games in general, when they first start off, they don't really know how the game will evolve. And so when they assign a certain property or attribute to it, they don't know that 10 or 20 years down the road that it becomes extremely powerful. And so I think
Yeah.
potentially maybe that's similar. I don't know Pokemon or nor the card for Charizard.
One quick
Hmm.
thing about that, I don't know much about Pokemon either. That's not what I play.
Right.
However, I don't believe the Charizard was valuable because it was powerful.
Oh,
It
okay.
might have been powerful at the time that it was created. It definitely is not powerful nowadays.
I see.
But what made that one expensive and rare is the
Hmm.
quality. There are
Mm.
very few printed, and because
Oh.
everybody knows Charizard, I think that those are
Oh,
the
I
main
see.
reasons for
Right.
collectors why it was so expensive. And
Gotcha.
that also lends true to Magic as well too. There are some
Hmm.
cards that are not very powerful but are very rare, that
That's
will
true.
also drive up the price.
That's
Yeah,
true. So basically, I think to recap is scarcity, right? The rarity of
yeah,
something, and
hmm
also the fact that the popularity or the brand name, so to speak, right? Like if you don't know much about Pokemon, but you've at least heard about that Pokemon character,
that's
then
right.
there's that popularity behind it. Got you.
Totally,
Okay.
totally. Yeah,
And then
that's the main thing.
do
Mhm.
you know if there was I mean, I don't know if you looked into it, but do you know anything more with regards to why? And I don't know if I remember correctly whether it was during like the pandemic period, if that was when it was doing its thing. I kind of vaguely remember that was the case
Mhm.
when we were
Yep,
living
yep,
through it. Because that was
yep.
also like the Bitcoin's bull cycle, right?
Yeah,
Where it was kind of going through some crazy ups. And then I think that's where I was starting to hear about how magic cards were gaining value.
yeah.
Yeah. Do you know more about that you want to
I,
speak to?
I can share what I recall, and I might not be 100%
Mm-hmm.
right on exactly how the events
Sure.
played out, but I think a lot of it was a lot of people that were into cryptocurrency in general, not just Bitcoin, um, had a background in playing Magic or knew
Mm-hmm.
people that played Magic.
Right.
It's a similar circles. A lot of people
Overlap.
picked it up early, made money in crypto
Right.
in general.
Right.
Were also players of Magic as well. And granted, Magic is a very big community,
Mm-hmm.
so there's a lot of people that do it not related to crypto too.
Of course.
The thing was that Magic was also, and still is to a certain extent, seen as a pretty liquid marketplace for people that had a lot of money, that
Mm-hmm.
had a lot of old and rare cards.
Right.
And so them dumping money in, I think, in my opinion, was twofold. One is they could definitely hold something of very valuable, which is very small, tangible in their hands at any time,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
They could also be able to offload it to someone else
Yeah.
quite easily without any tracing or tracking.
Right.
Now, I don't know if that's plays any importance from jumping out of crypto to an actual collectible,
Mm-hmm.
um, in that regards, but I would think it lets some credit to why they chose that.
Maybe. Yeah.
Also, there's a big nostalgia factor.
Mm-hmm.
The reason why I got back into it is, and the same with a lot of people that I play with, is we stopped playing for a long period of time, but we kind of gone back to playing Magic in the last couple of years, and the reason was, just people have nostalgic value, right? And so when people have
Mm-hmm.
a lot of money, when they make it from one or two different easy ways, they would
Right.
tend to want to spend it, right?
Mm-hmm.
If they already got the Ferraris and the houses and everything's locked
Sure.
down,
Yeah.
the next things they tend to look for, I believe, is the collectible stuff, right? Things that they wanted to have, but they couldn't get from before.
Childhood things that they were fond of. Now they can go back and get them and collect
Exactly.
them, right? And so
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
what you're speaking to is again the size of the network, right? The fact that there's a
Yeah.
large community behind it, and then that ties in with liquidity, right? Being able to buy and sell trading cards with a large market is beneficial because if you're playing with a small community, no one's going to want your cards if you want to sell them,
Yeah.
or if you wanted to buy it, no, not many people have it, or not many people are willing to sell it, then it's not liquid.
hmm
But the fact that the magic community is it has a deep history,
Yep.
is very large, especially with the fact that, and you mentioned it earlier, they have different formats now where Commander specifically, or EDH, which I believe stands for Elder Dragon Highlander,
Yeah, that's right.
which
Yep.
later got called Commander, um,
Hmm.
which again uses a lot of cards, way more than normal, 100 cards per deck. Whereas
Yeah.
the traditional one-on-one format that you talked about, those are generally speaking, I think were they 20 cards a deck?
60
60?
card decks,
Okay.
and I think 15 card sideboard.
Oh,
So
I
you
see.
can change up to 15 cards when you bring in a tournament.
Hmm.
That was part of your staple that you could kind of rotate out depending on what you're facing and stuff like that.
Right, right.
So
And
I think I could be
I think you're
mistaken too, but I
accurate.
think something in the general lines of that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's fair. And I think in the past, with our discussions on Magic, you mentioned how, the fact that, Commander being so popular, and the fact that Commander requires at least, 100 cards, unique cards for that matter,
Yes.
in the
Except for
deck.
lands, but yes.
Sure.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
That's a major factor with regards to boosting I guess the community or the market, right? Because now everyone needs, if they have more than one deck even, and they want to play the same card, they would have to go and source that card. If they have 4 decks, they might want that card in all
Yes.
4. Then they have to go and
Yep.
get 4 of those instead of 1, right? Obviously, that
That's
depends
right.
on the person playing and how many decks they have. But I think me and you both know that as you play Commander specifically, it's because it's such a creative game. You have to create your own deck, how the cards work together, the synergy, the combos you can pull off, the crazy
Yep.
infinite combos too, right?
Hmm.
And the community loves it, right? In that sense of finding
Yes.
new and different ways to not necessarily break the game, but you know, basically
Well, they
give
do
a
that. They find ways
that
to break the
too,
game for sure all the time.
right?
Yeah.
And also,
Hmm.
have a good time, but also have
Yeah.
this
Of course.
crazy
Yeah.
notion to it, right? And I
Yeah.
think that
Yeah.
that helps boost that economy, so to speak, where
Hmm.
everyone needs more cards, not less, right? And
Yeah.
there's so many formats, right?
Yep.
Um,
There's also
mhm,
another part of it too. Now that I think about it,
mhm,
you also when you also look back now, like because the game's been around for 25 years, 30 years. I forgot
sure,
how long exactly,
yeah,
approximately. It's still around, right?
mhm,
And that's a lot like Bitcoin in a way. If it's
mhm,
been around and after many years people are talking about it and you look back, you're like, hey, I used to play that.
right,
And hey, look, it's still around and I still have these cards. And oh my God, it's worth this much now.
mhm,
Like
mhm.
that also kind of gets you back into collecting more when you have the means to,
That's right.
right? You look back and you'll be like, oh, this thing, because you have like we not how should I put it? Not many people would know or may know this is that a lot of card games are being developed, and there will be a lot more card games that are going to be developed,
Right,
right? But
right.
a lot of them fail, right? A lot
Mhm.
of them don't make it for one reason or another, right? There has to be a certain following, there has to be certain
That's right.
attractiveness to it,
Mhm,
and there is a very large base of people that play this game,
mhm.
um, and they continue to support it, and the community is really good in that sense in terms of people wanting to just play,
Right.
and so yeah, that there's just you have to have the right things, and it's hard to kind of get a market share when there's already
Yes.
something like this.
Yeah.
There's a lot of games that are not knockoffs, but they get their inspiration,
Mhm.
and it's true because people play this game, right? And they like it, so they try to make their own derivative of it, right?
Right.
Which sounds a lot like Bitcoin, right?
Sure
In
enough.
all aspects, and a lot of correlation, in my opinion.
Or I guess you can kind of see this, in terms of a Bitcoin being like the Magic, the Gathering, and then all the altcoins being the other card games that are trying to copy it. Kind of like
Exactly,
that kind of
exactly.
similar.
Try to
Yeah. Right.
improve
Upon
little
it.
bits of it. Yeah,
Right.
but does it work? I mean, who's to say, right?
Sure.
Sometimes maybe
Maybe.
for a short while it
Yeah.
does, but
Yeah.
then afterwards things change, right? People
Right.
change, right? And then new ones will take its place, and more new ones will still keep coming up. I'm talking strictly about other cryptocurrencies, right?
Sure.
Bitcoin is Bitcoin,
Yeah.
right? But like everything else out there has that tendency to have its ups and downs,
Mhm,
in my
mhm.
opinion.
And to your point, what you were speaking about earlier with Magic is because of the fact that it is one of the earlier trading card games. I don't know if historically whether it was absolutely the first or not, but it was definitely one of the earlier ones to become popular, having mass adoption. So there's that network effect, right, which we talked
Yeah.
about. That's huge.
Right.
And
Yeah.
then also there is that first mover, right, where they've set certain rules where the community is like, yeah, I like how this plays. And once that's in place, if that community were to try other trading card games that come along, they'll automatically
Yeah.
compare it to the one that they're most familiar of, which most likely would be Magic the Gathering, and they'll say,
Right.
well, this is kind of similar to Magic. Now we can see what they've done differently, but does it work well or do I like it? That's a different story. So some things people will like, oh yeah, this is better. And then there are some things where like maybe not, right? So one example
Hmm.
to just kind of go into that topic is
Yeah.
whether you're playing, I think in most formats, because of the fact that the way Magic the Gathering works is you have lands which generate mana, right? And you
Yes,
use the
that's right.
mana kind of like, in-game currency where you use it to cast other
Yeah.
spells or creatures. Now, there's one key problem that a lot of people gripe about, and it does happen, is depending on how
Yeah.
well you shuffle your deck, you
Yeah.
can be so-called mana screwed or land screwed, right? Where
Yeah.
you simply are not hitting your land cards draw after draw. And it's very important, especially
Yes.
with Magic the Gathering, to establish a fundamental mana base. So I think most
Hmm.
cards, or in most formats, generally you want at least 3 land cards in your hand as starting. Is that correct?
Uh,
Keep me honest.
yeah, I mean, it really depends on how quickly your deck plays out.
Mm,
If your deck is built in a way where you have a lot of low mana cards, the low costing cards, you
sure.
don't need that many lands to start with.
Right.
There's also the way of like fixing your mana, or
Mm-hmm.
maybe what they called ramping your mana, so you can put things into play where they generate new mana that are not lands,
Correct.
right?
Yeah.
To kind of keep it more. I'm not trying to dumb it down, but it's just that there's a lot of terms I don't want to
Sure
use
enough.
in the game
Yeah.
because it's hard for people that don't know Magic to know what those are. But
Mm-hmm.
basically, there are just many ways of either getting around it. But a lot of it is strategy and building and a bit of luck. I think that's also the appeal is that
Mm-hmm.
because you're playing a format that has 100 different cards per se,
Right.
the chances of getting the same thing is very unlikely game
Mm-hmm.
after game, even if you just have one deck. So that's a thrill, right? Like people, oh, what am I going to draw this game, right? Did I build my deck properly that so no matter what I draw, I can
Mm-hmm.
get myself out of it? Those
Right.
are all things that run through my mind at least when I play. So yes, but to your point, correct. Like if you have too much resources or too much lands, in this case,
Mm-hmm.
you get flooded, right? It's a
Right.
term.
Yes.
And if you don't have enough, then you get screwed.
Yes.
So either way is not a good thing, right? You have to kind of hit like a sweet point, which
Right.
makes your deck hum and run the way you want it to.
Right. And then ideally you have enough land cards that you can play any card in your deck. But it takes time because it's turn based. So if your opening hand doesn't have the right amount of land to basically allow you to keep playing for the first 3 to 4 turns, you're going to be behind because everyone else, if they're able to draw their land cards, they're going to continue to be able to build up their land base or so-called in-game mana currency, right? And then be able
Yes.
to execute the cards or spells that they want to play. Now, the reason why I brought that up is because there are other trading card games that try to address this, and
Yes.
even people that try to come up with different rules, right? Where
Yep.
I think in some of them you can literally have like a separate deck where it's like all of your just your land cards, and you can draw from it whenever you want. Is that correct? Correct. Just keep me honest here.
Sorry, you meant for other games that are out there?
Yeah, I
or
believe
or yeah,
other
yeah, yeah.
card
There,
games
there are there.
had some kind
Are.
of. Mhm.
Yep. There's a new game called I think Sorcery that just came out not too long ago, which does exactly that. You have a pile. Like I don't know how to play the game. I just
Sure.
watched a YouTube video on how to play it. Just I was
Right.
curious.
Hmm.
So it's like they basically they solve that problem. Um, they have a separate pile that's like a lands type of card that generates resources,
Right.
and you just draw that if you need to, or you just draw it no matter what. So
I
you
see.
always have something to
Hmm.
get that. And so the strategy is no longer revolved around whether or not you get mana flooded or screwed. It's more about how you play out the game and the flow of the game. It's not a right or wrong thing. It's just how you like. It depends on the designer and depends how the people out there like your game, right? If there's a following and it works, then it works, right?
Yeah, and I think it's too hard to say, but like those type of strategies where they try to fix that scenario of not enough mana or too much mana. I mean, it works, right? But then
Hmm.
in terms of like again, like that first mover network effect where people already have ingrained into them that, well, this is Magic, this is how we play Magic, we don't have a separate deck
Yeah.
for lands or mana or whatever, right? So
Exactly.
they accept the
Exactly.
fact
Yeah.
that yes, there is that chance, and the chance is
Hmm.
exciting, right? Where you could get land screwed or mana screwed or flooded
Yeah.
for that matter, right?
Yeah.
And they're willing they're okay with that. And
Hmm.
whereas they'll say, well, that's a different card game over there. You can have a separate deck for your mana or lands, right? And
Yeah.
they just won't conflate the two. Like they won't. There may be subsets that try to bring that into Magic, but then people
Yeah.
that play it, the community automatically kind of says, no, that's not Magic, right? So
Right.
it's
Right.
it's
Exactly.
interesting
Exactly.
in that sense. It's
Yeah.
almost like kind of relating to like the Bitcoin protocol. You try to do
Yeah.
something different, like fork the code, and if
Hmm.
it's a hard fork, it's not backwards compatible. The
Yeah.
community says, no, I don't want that, right? So I don't care if your transactions are faster. I don't care if you're able to mint more or produce more coins per block,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
That's not what I like, Bitcoin for, or in this case, Magic, right? So it's kind
Yeah.
of interesting in that sense.
And then do you remember you when we first got into playing board games? You remember
Hmm.
the dice game you introduced me to,
Oh, the
which
Marvel.
was cool.
Hmm.
I forgot what it was called. Basically, each dice represented like the hero
Yes,
or ability that you had, and you basically roll dice. But
right.
the funny thing was when I was playing it, I was like, wow, this game reminds me a lot like Magic. Like
Hmm.
this phase in the game where you interact with the other person, or when you do a certain setup. I go, well, when you explain the rules to me, I was like, well, that's just like Magic's like this
Hmm.
part A or part B, and so I kind of already automatically kind of said like, oh well, it's like the game I used to play. Then the conversation leads to, well, since this game is sort of like that, why don't we just play Magic? Why do we
I
go
remember
back
that.
and play
Yep.
this new game, right? And that's how it kind of all gets started with a lot of different
Yes.
games out there, which are
Yes.
derivatives. Once you find out there's a derivative of something, then you're like, well, this thing's already been done before.
Hmm.
Why are we spending time looking at this one? Although, granted, it might be fun, it might be different because it has its own uniqueness, and that's
Sure.
great, right? Because we
Yeah.
don't want to stifle creativity. But the
Hmm.
thing is, when it comes down to it, people are like, well, maybe I should just go for the original,
Right.
right?
Right.
And see what that's like before I pass judgment on if this game is my my taste, kind of thing.
Hmm. Hmm. And it's interesting how you think that there can be so many, there's so many games, board games, card games, dice games, whatever. And
Hmm.
you think that there would be more variation on in terms of like, well, what people prefer or not prefer. But the interesting thing, or I guess maybe the impact of the Magic the Gathering and its base rule set is it leaves an impression, right?
Yes.
It's simplified enough that it makes sense and it's direct. Albeit
Yeah.
Magic can be a very complicated game, right? But we're talking about like
Right.
basically the simple movements of tapping the card, or certain ways of
Yeah.
playing a card.
Hmm.
Those things are fundamental, and the fact that other games out there they I mean, albeit there's limitations when you're dealing with a dice or a card. There's only so many things you can do with it, right? But like the gravity, with the gravitation back towards using that same type of mechanic doesn't
Yeah.
quite change, and the fact that
Right.
people find that the most, I don't know whether it's comfortable or the most straightforward.
Yeah.
It's just neat to see.
Familiar. Right.
Right,
Yeah.
correct, yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, no, it's true. But it's fine. Like we know that this game, it could last for a lot longer, or it could die out too, right?
Sure.
We never really know where it's going to head to. It's one of those things where we enjoy the moment, and for me, these games is it's not really the competitiveness part of it is fun, but it's really kind of coming together with friends and
Yes.
families to kind
Hmm.
of sit down and have a game. I relate it a lot to it once again is for the people out there that don't know what Magic the Gathering is. It's sort of like mahjong, right?
Okay.
It's like four people sitting around a table and they play for hours. For people that don't know what that is, it's basically four people that are competing against each other to win.
Hmm.
That's basically what it kind of comes down to. Even though Magic originally had it to be a one-on-one type
Right.
of game,
Right.
it has now evolved into once again different formats where
Right.
different people are able to play the game.
Yeah, multiplayer. And I think that that's the great thing, right? The one-on-one, yes, I mean, if you've got a group of four people, you can, have two groups of one-on-one, but it
Yeah.
doesn't beat it doesn't beat having four people being able to play together at the same time, or five or
Yeah.
six, right? And I think that's where Commander is interesting, is it's inclusive, right? You don't have to sit and wait.
Yes.
Oh, I already defeated my opponent, I'm waiting to play you, but you're still playing your opponent. And there's a lot of waiting, right? And people don't want to sit
Yeah.
around waiting, especially when Magic the Gathering was made so that instead of playing in between games of D&D, where I
Yeah.
suspect people might
Yep.
not
That's right.
be either they need a break, or in between, like a break of it, or
Yeah.
maybe they're waiting for their next get together and they can't all get together, so only
That's
some
right.
of them, and so they'll get together to play Magic instead. And so
Yeah.
I mean that makes sense, but ultimately you're right, like the socializing, right? Another format could be if a lot of people play Texas Hold'em, like poker,
Yes,
and
that's right.
they're sitting around, right? And basically
Hmm.
you're gambling, you're playing your cards, whatever, but it's also that interaction, right? You can, especially if
Right.
you're with your
Right.
buddies or whatnot.
That is very true. The aspect of playing against other people with other people
Hmm.
does, once again, also bring more people together. Um, there is, of course, a very strong distinction between, obviously, Texas Hold'em is money related, and to
Yes.
win, and no one's really playing for fun. I think a lot of people are playing to win in that case because
Yes.
there's some prize money at the very end. It's more so than ever. It's always a competitive nature for
Hmm.
Texas Hold'em. But there are a lot of people that are really, really good from Magic that go and play Texas Hold'em because
You're
a
right.
lot of the skill set of Magic is math based. How to calculate and knowing your opponent and having reads
Hmm.
are all poker related, and also all are also can be Magic related, and sometimes they're interchangeable. You can use it in both
Hmm.
sense to get advantage on your opponent. Now, you might not always win, but that's also same with poker, right? Even though
Right.
you have perfect information, there is still the luck aspect of it. What card's going to come next, no one
Right.
knows. And so, unless you're cheating, there is no way of being 100% winner at every session. But
Sure.
the whole point is you have a good enough record or a good enough um, uh, uh, chance of beating your opponent.
Hmm.
Just means it's still a skill based game at the end.
Right, right. To overcome the odds, right? Even out the
Exactly.
statistics,
Yeah.
so to speak, which is very
Right.
interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's circle back for a second
Yep.
to the cards. Right now with Magic, it's what's interesting is there is an older set of cards that Wizards of the Coast, right, which is the company that makes Magic the Gathering and also the D&D
That's
games.
correct. Yep.
They kind of made a pact or a soft agreement, right? Where they
Yes.
said, "Hey, we're not going to print these older sets because we know there's a legacy of players where they don't want to see those cards reprinted. They want to keep the
Mhm.
value there for whatever reasoning." And I'm sure you can
Yes.
probably speak better to that. But what I want to call out is that after those sets were basically deemed untouchable,
Yeah.
and then after that, newer sets were introduced, which did not fall into that agreement. And those cards in those sets got reprinted quite more often, I would say. Right.
Yes.
We believe, I think, from our past discussions, that Wizards of the Coast, sometimes people call it WOTC, that's
Mhm.
WOTC. They
Yeah.
purposely monitor the market just to see what cards are getting too expensive, and they'll purposely reprint those ones. So in a way, they're kind of
Yeah.
bringing it down. I think maybe with good intentions, where they want more people to be able to afford a card, but they also purposely don't overprint it too much, even though it's the latter sets, the newer sets, where they don't have that soft agreement, right? There's no
Yes.
reason why they couldn't print it to death. But I suspect they know that if they print anything too much, then the value falls right out of the bottom, right? And
Yeah.
then one of the, I guess, the driving aspects of the trading card game is that aftermarket trading economy, right? Because people do like to be able to sell their cards, buy other cards. And if you're simply, as a company, you're simply just going to print everything to death, well, then what's the point of trading or trying to buy or sell your cards? Why don't you just buy another pack, because you're going to have really high chances of hitting that card because it's printed so much. So maybe
Totally.
maybe you can talk
Totally.
a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so what you're referring to is they would call it the reserve list, right? So there's a list of cards from
Right.
the older sets that are on
Hmm.
this list, and their agreement with the players were back then, and sort of still now, is that they will never reprint the exact same cards ever again. This was to hold the value of those cards for collectors, because before
Oh,
Magic
right.
there were other card games as well too.
Hmm.
And what would happen is, when there was nothing like this involved, people will start, or companies will start reprinting these cards.
Hmm.
And what ends up happening, like you said, was would tank the market. And
Right.
to the game players, this is a very hot topic, right? Because there's a
Hmm.
lot of people on both sides of the fence. There are people that are for the reserve list and there are people that are
Sure.
against the reserve list.
Right.
And it doesn't really matter, I would say, for my perspective. It is what it is. It doesn't change how you play the game. It
Hmm.
could change how you see it as an investment, although this is
Right.
not financial advice.
Hmm.
None of this is financial advice. People tend to buy those older cards because they retain or they see an increase in value over time because there's more people that want it. Or so that's the thought behind it, anyways. And so
Hmm.
when you talk about how much they print and what they can do to control it, they do that exactly that. In my opinion, they do it because they want to sell more product, right?
Sure.
They tell you this card hasn't it's gone up in value, everyone wants it, that it's going to be reprinted in the new set. But they don't print too many of it, like you said,
Hmm.
because they don't want to tank the card, but they want to tell you that it's there so that you buy their new products, right? That's how the cycle works for them. They want to make sure
Right.
you still spend your money to buy the next set, hopefully to get what you're trying to get, and hopefully the set itself is also good and fun to play with.
Hmm.
In my opinion, it's not an afterthought. I mean, they have to make sure the product is good to a certain extent,
Yep.
but they definitely the wow and attractiveness is like the cards that I need because it was getting too expensive are now possibly available, and or now that they have announced printing, the set doesn't even need to hit the market yet. The old cards will start to tank because people
Hmm.
know that more of it is coming. So
Right.
they will start offloading it now, which will then, of course, create more supply, and then automatically the card will come down in price regardless. So it does have that
Right.
effect. Whether or not they're trying to go for making people be able to afford the card, I think they're leaning as a as a business owner and as someone that you want to sell a product, you don't really care whether or not people are having. I mean, you do. You want them to have a good product,
Right.
but your bottom line is your shareholders, right?
Exactly.
You want people that have invested in you or is still investing in you, the WotC, World Wizards of the Coast, to continue to do so and are happy. So their bottom line is how much product can they push every year, and I think you've seen that more and more so these days in terms of from WotC anyways. It's become more of a product driven business. That's I mean
Yes. It,
it's always has been,
yeah.
but definitely community and the players have been have been taking a back seat. They're not going to be the ones that they're solely caring about.
Right. So I think to go back to what you're calling out is it's incentives, right?
Yeah.
The fiat system at play, right? You've got
Hmm.
shareholders, and in this case, I believe Wizards of the Coast have always been um from the start quality minded and also
Mm,
gameplay minded, meaning they want the game players to have a good experience. The product that they push out is of quality, right?
yeah.
However, and I think maybe this is speculation, but from what I've read, what I heard, ever since Wizard of the Coast was bought out by Hasbro, right?
Yes.
And more importantly, from the quarterly reports or something that have been shared out, apparently Wizards of the Coast, Magic the Gathering itself, makes quite a bit of profit for Hasbro, more so
Oh yeah.
than Hasbro's
The
the
most
most.
profit actually.
Okay,
Yeah.
and
Hmm.
which is
Yeah.
which is funny, right? Like, because you'd think Hasbro being such a large toy company of all sorts, you'd think their other toys would be bringing in good money, but turns out no, it's not as good as the trading card business.
Yeah.
And here's the
Yeah.
thing with incentives, right? As they say, show me the incentives, I'll show you the results. Is it's
Hmm.
very hard for Hasbro not to go to WotC and go, hey, you guys make us a lot of money.
Yeah.
We want you to continue doing that. So find a way to do it, right? And so I think
Yeah.
that's where WotC comes between, a rock and a hard place. Is yes, you're right,
Hmm.
absolutely. There are those shareholders over on the Hasbro side. They're like, hey, we put
Yeah.
good money into this company. We expect returns. And the
Hmm.
only subsidiary that actually makes good money is WotC, who
Yeah.
are or Wizards of the Coast, who are literally printing cards, right? And it's not
Yes.
lost on
Yeah.
us that this same
Yeah.
concept is
Yeah.
really like any government printing fiat money. you
Totally.
you want your
Totally. It's like a
citizens to
smaller scale. Yeah.
right, you want your
Yeah.
citizens to have good lives,
Yeah.
quality lives and
Yeah.
good purchasing power. But when your economic incentives are to grow the economy because of some weird view that it must grow by a certain percent every year or you're not doing well,
Yeah.
similar types of thought process or perspective potentially, where it then
Hmm.
drives them to then print more. But of course, in this case, arguably, I would say governments generally don't do as well as what WotC does. Although I do feel that they do monitor the economy similarly to see what assets are going up or coming down, and then they'll do their magic behind the scenes to try to, pardon the pun, but try to, kind of balance the economy out in the way they think is best, which often
Yeah.
leads to more money printing, right? Which again doesn't do anything for the citizens because that's basically theft, right? Without
Yeah.
it's like tax without taxation, right? Like you're just stealing from
Right.
everybody all at once. So
Yep.
I think that's the neat part of it, is where a trading card having a similar trading economy for the cards themselves has reflects the larger global economy of trade, right? Because in essence, that's what it is at a smaller scale.
Yeah. But in all honesty, I mean, we have to look at which economies right now are how do we put it, have been last the longest or has been lasting longest or have been working, I
Mm-hmm.
guess.
Mm-hmm.
And if you, I think you know, I don't want to get into politics, but how it's like, democratic or whatever, or different types of uh ways people run countries.
Sure.
They what's been working the most, I would say, as of our in our lifetime, is
Mm-hmm.
capitalism, I guess. And so it's
Supposedly.
basically the same model, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
like what WotC has turned into, or sorry, Hasbro has turned into, is being a capitalistic type of company, which a lot of companies are,
Oh,
right?
of
They're
course.
here to maximize profits, right?
Yeah.
And the governments, same thing. They're here to maximize votes, right? They need to get the votes of the people.
Yeah.
And how do they do that? Well, they can promise you stuff, so you
Right.
vote for them. Whether or
Right.
not they do it is one thing. They will help companies make more money. That's how
Mm-hmm.
they get votes from the companies and the corporations. And they will promise, the people that are, need healthcare or housing or
Mm-hmm.
Medicare or whatever, what they need, and they'll get votes that way. So they all have their incentives to do their things. Bottom line, yes, they're all there to make money, I would say, but they have different ways of keeping score.
Yeah, I think the way the governments help the corporations is by passing specific policy or
Yes.
laws that
Yeah.
allow their
Hmm.
businesses to flourish, and so hence
Yeah.
becomes the conundrum of corporations all lobbying specific
Yes.
politicians to get their way, and what the
Yeah.
politicians get out of it is basically money to do their to run for election because that stuff costs
Yeah.
money, right? Yeah, you have to
Yep.
advertise and all that stuff, and you got to tour the country and do your talks, right? That's not free. So where are you going to get
Yeah.
your money from? You're going to need sponsors, and those sponsors come in the form of lobbyists.
Yeah.
It's unfortunate that the way governments, at least the ones that are supposedly democratic, have become right.
Hmm.
Authoritarian ones put aside, there's no choice over there. Those are do or
Yeah.
die, right? So
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
I don't think we have to go into those ones. Those are pretty
No.
obvious
No.
how
No.
they run things. Let me circle back
Yeah.
to quality, right?
Yeah.
I think amongst the Magic player community, I think by and large, they agree that the reserve list or the ones that are basically set aside as these are the original cards. Wizards of the Coast isn't going to print any more of these.
Yeah.
The people compare the quality of the cards themselves,
Oh,
the
yeah. Yeah.
paper
Yeah. The
stock, the
cardboard that is printed
thickness,
on.
right?
Yep. That's
And
right.
one of the
Yeah.
key differences these days is the old cards are still like they're thicker and they're
Oh, yeah.
sturdier
Yeah.
and the
Yeah.
quality,
Yeah.
the
The rock solid, man.
everything is
Yeah.
better. Whereas all the ones that are mass produced that are allowed to be reprinted, the
Hmm.
quality, people refer to them as Pringles when they open them fresh out of
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
pack.
Yeah.
They all
Yep.
curl immediately. And
Right.
of
Right.
course, the community will make excuses. They'll say, well, that's because by and large it's physics. One side is paper, the other side is potentially a layer of plastic, and they have different temperatures, and it'll cause it to curl a certain way. Okay, but then there are those that criticize or call out that, well, what about the old cards? They didn't
Oh,
have that.
it's not even that.
Oh, okay.
I just want to add a little bit too. It also depends where it's printed, right?
Mm.
Normally, I think they were printed mostly in Belgium or something like that.
Oh, right.
And of course, there's the United States printers now, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's the printers in Japan. And so the quality from Japanese cards, even though it's the same set, they tend not to curl for Japanese cards,
Oh,
but they do
right.
curl at other countries that print them. So
Right.
a lot of times you look at the packaging and you're like, wow, these cards are a lot better, even though it's the same set. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, it's because it's printed in Japan. So it's not even it's not even so much that the older cards are better quality. It's the fact that how much care they have in their quality of their items. I think that kind of the product to see whether or not it comes out curled or not.
That's true. Although we have to, I guess I would have to admit that I believe Japan and in general their nation, the workers there, they hold themselves and their quality. They put a lot of pride behind quality.
Yeah,
And that
yeah,
shows
true.
in a lot of Japanese products. Not all. I've seen some Japanese products that don't fare as well as other Japanese products, but they still
Right.
are pretty decent. So there's different levels, right? But
Yeah.
you're right. Like simply comparing like printers that are printing Magic cards in Japan versus the ones that are printing it in United States or wherever else that they outsource it to, it shows, right? Like I'm
Mhm.
guessing there's no specific quality standard, right? I mean, sure there is, but in terms of like maybe the paper stock, either it's simply not available within or around the area in which those printers are located. That might be one
Yeah.
excuse, or simply maybe because
Yeah.
it just costs too much, right? Maybe the paper has
Right.
to come from somewhere, and to ship that paper just so that it gets to some other location to be printed that's not in the nearby vicinity, it's just cost prohibitive. So then they
That's right.
probably try to get the second best. And of course, the second best isn't the best, right? And then the quality
Yeah.
differences will show up or appear.
Yeah. Yeah. And of course, a lot of it may have to do with cost too, right? Maybe just cheaper to keep the quality as it is,
Sure. People will still
and
play it,
or
right?
agreements and stuff like
Right.
that. Yeah. So that's the. I mean, for one thing or another, it's definitely not under priority to
Hmm.
change the quality of the products. You would buy. They know you would buy it regardless if it comes out curl or comes out straight,
Yeah.
and that's the way they're going to continue to run it until it hurts their bottom line, which is really hard to tell, right? Like if you over there say you're not gonna buy it because it's curled, and I'm like, I don't care. I just want to play the game. I'll pay for it. Uh, then it doesn't. To them, it doesn't really matter. If I buy twice as many cards as you do, then it won't matter that you didn't buy, right? Even if you're voting with your wallet to say,
Yeah.
right?
Because the
Yeah.
market is willing to accept that, right? I think is what you're
Yeah.
getting at, which
Yeah.
is brutal because
Yeah.
there
It is.
you can call it efficiency or capitalism or whatnot, but it it's brutal when the market's like, I'm willing to accept that. That's okay, right? There's enough
Yeah.
people willing to still buy it that you know what? If it bends, we'll just use some, silica packs or whatever
Yeah. Yeah.
to
Yeah.
suck up the moisture, to
Yeah.
put
Yeah.
some
Yeah.
books
Yeah.
on them and flatten them out. Like
That's right.
it
Yeah.
which shows like human beings in general are willing to accept a lot of inconsistencies in life
Yeah. Yeah.
just to continue to live their lives, right? And they
Yeah.
most people won't complain until it gets to their bottom line where this says nope, this is it, right? You go any further than this, I'm gonna, I'm just gonna push back or fight back or revolt
Yeah.
or whatever it is that particular item of concern may be. So that's the brutal reality of it. But you're
Mhm.
right. Generally speaking, the market will dictate whether something is acceptable or not, right? And
Yeah.
how that's priced. Um,
And keep in
mhm.
mind that like this is a hobby, right? This is a collectible. That means usually you have excess money before you spend on stuff like this,
Yeah.
right? It's entertainment. So, and people are willing to accept a lower grade entertainment, even though there are other similar products out there, right?
Hmm.
Very many more. But yeah, because they have first movers advantage, or because of the popularity, or because the people that they hang out with, or the community
Hmm.
they like plays this game, they're automatically, there is no choice for them, right? If you want to be part of the group that you have to live with these type of situations, you're still going to spend the money to do so.
Well, here's the funny thing. We've both seen this too as well, where um, the Magic community is very, especially if you talk to the folks that are hardcore, like
Hmm.
they're very driven by you must be using Magic the Gathering official card to play,
Oh yeah,
right?
yeah,
No
yeah,
matter
yeah,
which format, right? Otherwise, there's that dirty looks. You're shunned, right? Oh, you're not
yeah,
invited because you're using like knockoffs or you printed it at home or whatever. But here's the funny
yeah.
part: there are a lot of printing companies out there, right? And I
Hmm.
think we're both aware that there are Chinese companies that
Yes,
do knockoff prints. And the
yes,
funniest part is you'd think that, oh, because they're knockoffs, these companies would do poor work. Funny enough, some of the
yeah.
samples that we've seen through friends or whatnot, or that's floating out there, they have better quality than the actual real cards that are being printed by
Oh yeah,
WotC, right?
yep. Hmm. Yep,
Do
absolutely.
yeah. Mhm.
Oh, I was just say, yeah, that's absolutely right. So these so-called proxies, I guess, right, were
Right.
made to be a cheaper alternative, and also it destroys the argument of like people hand drawing proxies, right? Because the issue with that for a player is that it's not so much that we care about whether or not you use a fake card versus a real card. It's that if you just print it out of your printer at home, which is black and white, we might not be able to see or recognize the card properly when we're playing the game. So that does have some impact to actually
Sure.
playing the game.
Hmm.
But you're absolutely right. The community is very hardcore on making sure that you have um, the legit card. And sometimes that is because when you enter tournaments,
Yes.
um, you have to. So
Makes sense.
that's one thing. But I think what it comes down to is I spent $100 of my real money to buy the card that I'm playing with, right? I'm sitting there enjoying that. But when I'm not saying this is right, but the feeling is
Hmm.
that when I see you just buy one that's a knockoff, that's a fake, I feel like, well, that's not fair to me. Even though this game is, who cares? You're playing your own deck versus someone else's deck.
Right.
The fact that you're all sitting down at the table and playing, it's sort of like you should be. That's the entry fee, right? Like if you don't
Mm.
pay
Hmm.
to play the game, then you shouldn't be sitting at the table playing with us. I think that's the unspoken
Mentality.
um thought process,
Yeah.
about it. Not everyone sees it that way. Some people just like, have a good game, it's fine. But I
Hmm.
do sense that there's a lot of like, well, I spent this much money, on this game. If you were to join me, you so should you. That would be only fair. But in all honesty, that's really not the case because
Yeah.
whether or not he spent the money buying the card or you bought the cards, you bought the most expensive card, doesn't necessarily mean you win, right? And if
True.
your whole definitive result is because I spend money, I bought expensive cards, I should win,
Pay to
that
win.
doesn't always mean it's true.
Yeah.
So then what does it matter what the cards are worth,
But
right?
but
So
mhm.
it's a yeah, it's an argument that's can spawn so many
Yes.
sides, right? Yeah.
So with that said, though, the cards that are generally speaking, like even for the ones that are allowed to be reprinted, the ones that are
Mhm.
worth more, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I believe are the ones that are of high utility, right? Where it does provide an
Yeah.
advantage, right? Those will definitely be worth more because it's seen as a more powerful card. And so usually those ones would demand a higher price. And I think back to your point is if someone
Yeah.
printed the same card, which I went and spent $100 on just to acquire, instead
Yeah.
of me feeling powerful when I play the game and having an advantage, all of a sudden someone
Yeah.
comes out with a proxy from China and it looks
Yeah.
better and it has the exact same picture, graphics, words, or whatever on it. It plays the
Mhm.
same,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
there's a little bit of that being miffed. Like, how dare you, go and just print one
Yeah.
when I actually have to spend good money to buy this card? And then there's a little bit of that internal conflict, right? Where they
Mhm.
feel
Yeah.
like only I should be able to play this because I use my money to buy the real thing and you're using a fake. But I agree with you. And if you're just playing and you're just there to have fun, why should it matter? I fully 100%
Yeah.
agree that if you're going into a tournament, then you definitely should be using the real cards, not fakes, right? Because ultimately
Yeah.
you want to support the company that's making the quality game that you're playing. But I guess the
Yeah.
question here is more so the quality of the cards, not the quality of the game. The game, no doubt,
Of course.
is
Of
great,
course.
right? So it's
Yeah.
kind of that weird awkwardness between that and it's just neat because in a way the community itself is kind of self-enforcing, and tying it
Yeah.
back to
That's right.
Bitcoin, it's kind of like the protocols, right? You can
Yeah.
make a similar coin, but we're not gonna interact with you. You're not going to be part of our blockchain because it's not the same thing, right? You
Yeah.
can
Yeah.
sound the same, look the same, do all the same
Mhm.
things, you can have the same name, but you're not really the same thing, right? So you're either with
Yeah.
us or you're something separate, which is okay, but you can't call yourself as being the exact same thing. So that's just kind of the neat similarity between the two.
Yeah. Yeah. No, for sure.
Mhm.
Absolutely right. Um, there's just you can definitely draw a lot of similar lines between the twos, or even more, right? There's there's
Mhm.
always um, there's always some aspect of this, and that's why I think once again, sorry, going back to the
Mhm.
topic about back in 2008 or
Sure.
whenever.
2009,
No,
right?
sorry, after 2008, but when crypto was really
Oh,
or Magic was really hot. Pardon me. Um,
oh yeah,
a lot of people jumped over to it, making it hot, right? It's
right.
because there's a lot of correlations. People understand how to play the game
Mhm.
in crypto. They may know how to play the game monetary wise, right?
Mhm.
Um, of how magic cards work too. So it could
Mm.
be that they're just trying to flip more money, right? Oh, now I have the means to play with the big boys in Magic. Maybe I'll go buy the most expensive card and I'll buy them out, right? Because if I buy
Yeah,
them out, I control the
corner it.
market. Then I
Right.
can, which is like if I went and made a new crypto coin and it'd be
Mhm.
like there's 100 coins, I have 99 of them, right? And you want them,
Mhm.
right? It's established. I'm gonna make money, right? So
Yes.
there was a lot of that going on too, I believe.
Yes, to detail out what you're talking about is those potentially crypto boys went and bought the reserve list cards, which are not
Yes.
allowed to be
Yeah.
printed anymore, so to speak.
Yeah.
Soft legality there.
Hmm.
And so they cornered the market for certain cards. I think at the end it became like pretty much any card on the reserve list, but because it
Yeah.
got so flamboyant, right? But the ones that they
Yeah.
focused on were the power nines, or like the nine most powerful cards of all time. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Right. And
Uh,
mhm.
just any higher end reserve list card,
Mm,
and it could be outside of. That was the thing. They were pumping cards that weren't even. that good.
Right,
It was
right,
just old and part of that list, and
right.
and
They
it
all
so
went
it
up.
caused it frenzies for any card on the reserve list. Yeah,
But to your point though, let's say they pick the most expensive, I think, which is like the
yeah,
Black Lotus, for example, right?
right, right,
They would buy them all out, or they would all
yeah,
try to, and then once they cornered it, then they set the price for what that card is. So I
yeah.
think at
That's
some
right.
point that card went from like a couple thousand to a couple like 10, 20, 30 grand or something like that. Was that correct? The prices are crazy.
Uh, I mean, over the years, depends on how much of a time horizon you're
Sure.
giving these cards.
Hmm.
Yeah, I mean, the card used to be when I first started playing Magic, and this is very early on.
Hmm.
Basically, 2 or 3 years into when the game was actually, no, 4 or 5 years, not 2 or 3 years, 4 or 5 years since the game has been put on the market. The Black Lotus, the most expensive card, was like $400 or $500. Right now, I think the cheapest one, not the best quality, mind you, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Is in the yeah 20 20 to $40,000 range. Yeah,
Right. Right.
so it depends on which version and the grade and all that kind of stuff, right? All that
Exactly.
stuff has a big
Sure.
price tag
Just like
associated
baseball
with it.
cards or hockey cards or
Yes,
yep.
just like baseball cards,
Hmm.
basketball cards, you name it. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah,
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 that's it's just crazy. I mean, if people wanted to,
yeah.
they can go and look up the different websites that exist that post the prices for the cards. They even set it up to look like the stock market, right? Where they
Oh,
track the
for sure.
price over time,
Yeah.
and people can see that the prices are going up or dropping, and it's
Yeah.
just crazy, like how mature that particular economy became because of the amount of people that were interested in it or invested in it, if you want to say that. um
Right.
but that's the interesting thing. Now I'm gonna pivot a little bit here. I'm gonna talk about
Sure.
my recent experience. So I think harking back a little bit, like we earlier in this podcast we were talking about like the year, I think it was like 2017, where again we were playing that Marvel. I brought it out and we were playing the
Yeah.
Marvel dice game, forgot what it's called. And then you
Yeah.
noticed that again the rules were very similar to Magic, but it was kind of like kind of clunkier potentially. Why not play like the real thing or try the real thing or the real set of rules for
Yeah.
Magic just to compare? And when we
Yeah.
did, it really opened up a door for us friends that were playing it, because we realized that, oh, this is so much deeper. It's I mean, obviously the dice rolling Marvel card game thing was meant for potentially a younger audience as a starting point.
Right.
Didn't have to
Right.
be, but it was
Yeah.
simplified to kind of keep things more easier to manage. But
Yeah.
at the same time, once you saw what Magic could do, and it could play played at a simpler level, or it could go really deep depending on the type of cards that you're using or the format that you're
Hmm.
playing in.
That's
It,
right.
it it
Yeah.
it added those levels of like flavor. It's like drinking wine or whiskey, right? Like,
Yeah.
oh, there's these subtle
Yeah.
notes of other things that you see and you're like, wow, and it just opens your mind that way. And that's very
Yeah.
neat. Now,
Mhm.
as we got into the game, obviously as sets came out, one of the things that friends talked about was, oh, I'm gonna buy this set and I'm gonna keep it for 10 years or whatever, and maybe play with my kids, or I'll crack it later, 10, 15 years later, and just
Yeah.
reminisce, and it'll be cool because no one would have this set anymore unopened. And sealed
Yeah.
product in the economy, like the Magic the Gathering trading space, they hold value, right? Not all
Yeah.
sets, but certain sets that have really good cards or maybe really short supply.
Yeah.
There's I think there's at least a few YouTuber content creators out there that talk about sealed sets and their values and all
Yeah.
that, so people can find
That's right.
that themselves. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
but the
Lots of it.
interesting, right? And so the interesting thing for me, I mean, I went down that rabbit hole as well, where I was like, oh,
Hmm.
you know what? I like these sets. I think they're going to be worth something, or I value them, or I see value myself for it, and I'm gonna
Yeah.
buy one set, keep it sealed, and I did, right. And so I think I
Yeah.
ended up buying two sets,
Yeah.
and kept them sealed. And I think
Hmm.
the one of them I think it was like the 2015 core set or something like that. So it's basically
Yeah. That's right.
almost 10 years old, right?
Yeah.
And with that said, though, I mean, I believe that those core sets are still available in the market. But there are other people that do the same thing. They'll keep it sealed and they still have it with them, right? And there could be
Yeah.
distributors that still have a pallet full of them for all we know. And so
Mm-hmm.
one of the things I did recently was, you know what? I thought about it and I'm like, I can keep these core sets at home sealed. It's kind
Yeah.
of cool. It's nostalgic, but at the same time, it's taking up space and it's not really, I mean, when I check the value of it online, it's not exactly growing by leaps and bounds, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think, in some cases they probably didn't go up or maybe got cheaper, right? Because I think, correct me if I'm wrong, like usually core sets, at least these days, when I look at the core sets that come out, they're basically like around 100, 120, 130, 140 for a set, approximately. Is that
Yeah,
about right?
it's gone up more now because
Mm,
they've been tinkering with their products and what's inside the products.
right.
So they used to be that each booster box, excuse me, each booster box that you had 36 packs in them, and they had I think
Mm-hmm.
12 to 13 cards. Now
Right.
they tweaked it, right? Now there's
Oh.
like less packs, less cards, but you get more of a certain rarity. There's a whole bunch
Oh,
of different
I see.
different
The
methods
formula.
of tinkering with it,
Right.
right? So there's some changes there.
Mm-hmm.
Like you said before, there's also the what was printed in those
Right.
sets.
Right.
That also changes the value of how sought after it was and how
Absolutely.
many of those boxes were printed, right?
Right.
If it was like unfortunately, I think looking back for core sets, they tend to print a lot more of them
Right. Right.
because they were core, like they were core to the game. So
Right.
they there's like these rotations that happen
Mm-hmm.
within the competitive scene, right?
Right.
They rotate out when certain sets come in,
Yep.
and so what ends up happening is one set lasts for I think 3 rotations, if I'm not
Mm-hmm.
mistaken.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, by year end, the set that was printed from the very beginning of the year, if it lined up exactly like a fiscal year, right,
Mm-hmm.
then it will no longer be used or be part of the competitive scene.
Right.
So therefore, it becomes, more valuable
Sure.
because it's not needed anymore, but
Right.
not right away though, right? Because
No.
it's still people still have it, right?
Exactly.
It's like when it's supposed to be like, oh, there's no more of it now. Now like there are people that will be like, oh, you know what? I want to go back and play
Sure.
the 2020 set,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And then it's like if there's a lot of people like that, then it becomes worthwhile.
So it potentially, time frame is one thing, right? Waiting even longer,
Yeah.
and maybe instead of waiting 10 years, wait 20 or 30 years later, where
Yeah.
literally no distributor or no one even has it at home anymore. Then that's potentially when it might be more valuable. Well, how much more
Pretty
valuable?
much.
Who knows? And then it also depends
Exactly.
on, is the community still as strong at that point, 10, 20, 30 years later, right? Or have
Yeah.
they all
That's
moved
right.
on, right? Like
Yeah.
it's all trend based. And so that was part of my thought process was, I can have
Mhm.
these boxes, essentially they're basically boxes of cards or paper. They're sitting
Yes.
there taking up
Mhm.
space. I look at the value online thinking that after 10 years maybe it has gone up a little bit more. But thinking back, I should have probably kept better records, and I probably do have them somewhere. But potentially buying that, the core set for 2015, it probably wasn't too expensive back in the day. Maybe what would you hazard a guess back in the day that would have been
So
100
it
something?
should have been around $100, I think.
Right. So let's say it went
Um,
up by, I don't even know if it
yeah.
went up much. I mean, it probably just stayed the same
It
price.
did, but it's based on like retail prices and
Yeah.
actual prices.
Hmm.
It's a little bit varied. Like it's
Right.
there's still some value in it. Like for example, if I'm looking it up right now,
While you're doing
Core
that,
20.
yeah, while
Yeah,
you're doing that, let's just say, for example, I bought it for 100. It now went up
yeah,
to maybe 200, right?
yeah, yeah.
Sounds really great. And then, of course, there's ranges, right? Because 200 might be the higher of the price. And most people, when they buy it, they'll probably look at the lower end to basically value what you have. So it probably only maybe 150, right, as being the
Hmm.
the increase by $50. So bought it for 100, now it's worth about 150 as the lowest price point that someone's willing to offer for it. Okay, so you say to
Yeah.
yourself, it went up, by $50. That's not bad, right? And then
Yeah.
so the thought process is, and of course, prior to selling it, I had discussions with you, and you advised me, right? Just beware,
Mhm.
like, when you sell stuff, even amongst our friends that play it, they forewarn that, when you sell it back to a shop or a store, and especially if you're asking for cash instead of credit, right? They're going to give you a lot less because they have to factor in they have to run a store, brick and mortar. They don't know how fast that product specifically, their community wants it. So they buy your box of whatever. And if it sits there on the shelf, it's with them, right? They
That's
absorb
right.
that, right? And so
Yeah.
if they're going to buy anything from you, they're only going to be potentially giving you 50%, right? So 50 cents on the
That's
dollar
right.
for what it's worth. And
Yeah.
that's based off of the lowest market value that's currently that they can find it at. So if they find it
Yeah.
at, even though when you looked it up or I looked it up, it's 150, but if they're able to find it for 100, they're going to say, well, I found it for 100 on this XYZ exchange market or whatever trading market. And given that it's potentially only worth 100, I'm going to offer you $50 for it. And so
Yeah.
and so that's the brutal part, right? Is you go in
Yeah.
thinking I have this sealed product, it's worth more. And to counter my own argument, yes, I could definitely post it on eBay, wait a period of time, slow fish it, wait for someone to come along, and I could potentially get the 150, right? But of course, then I have
Yeah.
to factor in the shipping. Some people may argue, well, you could have, charged whoever's buying it, the buyer, to pay for the shipping. Yeah, but then at that point, your 150 price point might be too expensive because the
Hmm.
the buyer then factors in, well, I have to pay another like what, $30 or $40 for shipping, and that's on top of
Yeah.
the 150. No way. Then I'd rather buy a box that's around 100 or 110, right? Because their budget
Yeah.
might be 150. So there's that at play. So there's a lot of trade-offs, obviously, for long time frame. Like if I had like a short low time preference, meaning I'm willing to wait and slowly sell it, sure, I can probably
Yeah.
milk the most out of it.
Yeah.
But for myself, the way I'm looking at it is like, well, I could do that and that will take my own time to do.
Hmm.
Or I could sell out of it at a store. So yes, at 50% and buy Bitcoin with it, right? Because my thought process is, yes, I'm
Yeah.
taking a loss up front, but
Hmm.
from, again, not financial advice, but my own perspective on Bitcoin is, as the saying goes, right? Fiat has no bottom, therefore Bitcoin has no top, right? Now, does that mean
Right.
Bitcoin's going to go through the moon tomorrow? No, but who's to say 10, 20, 30 years from now? So, that was the aspect I was going with, and of course the counter argument would be, oh, well, you could have held that magic corset for 10, 20, 30 years more. Maybe it'll be worth more than the Bitcoin. Personally,
Hmm.
I don't think that is the case because, again,
Yeah.
it's based off of the network effect, right? How many
Yeah.
people are collecting and playing magic potentially 20 to 30 years from now? They could still exist, it could still grow, but
Yeah.
compared to Bitcoin and the functionality of it, the intention of it, the potential it has, or what it has already become, and what it may be going even
Hmm.
further in the future, I think that potential is leaps and bounds way greater than a set of cards that are for
Right.
playing a game. And the cards don't scale, right? Bitcoin, it as intended, is supposed to be global money. So how do
Hmm.
you compare the world versus a community? It's just two different sizes. So that's why my thought
Right.
process was, you know what? I'm willing to take that loss up front. It is what it is,
Hmm.
but I'd much
Yeah.
rather hold something that is a hard asset in my mind. So some people,
Yeah.
magic cards are hard assets, especially like the reserve list, right? But
Hmm.
again, I'm more willing to, I guess in this case, um, place my bet, so to speak, on Bitcoin being able to become, um, continue to be a leader in that space for being a global money currency, right? And the demand
Yes.
for it will continue to grow. Sorry, go ahead.
So my thought about is that I thought about that as we talked about it before when I was there when you were selling these products, and you did tell me at that point, the plan and reasoning behind that, and I gave that some thought as well too. And I think you're right. If you're looking at Magic and Bitcoin, in this case, monetary value wise, as not financial advice, but
Hmm.
as it stands, you're investing in Magic to see if there's a return, then you're right. It's hard to compete, or if anything comes close to the changes of what Bitcoin has done. However, uh, you're gonna find a lot of people cross over between collecting and playing the game,
Mm-hmm.
which is not really part of what Bitcoin has to offer.
Correct.
So if you're strictly comparing them as um, devices of investments
Mm-hmm.
and output that way, yes, it's not gonna be you can't there would be no competition, but there is a value of playing and
Yes,
holding the cards
absolutely.
that Bitcoin will not have,
Correct.
because that's not what Bitcoin is there to do anyways.
Absolutely.
So
So it
it's
may not
just
be a fair
just a
comparison.
just a thought.
Yeah.
Yeah, like
Yeah. It's not
I
exactly
would say
fair.
though, yeah, I would say that if you were you're right. Like if you sold it, in this case, you didn't make anything or end up being at a loss. But the thing is, there's two things to take away from that I can
Mm-hmm.
see is one, you were able to sell it.
Sure.
That's
Yeah.
one thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like you could just walk into some random place and
Yep.
be like, "Hey, do you want to get it?" And they could still give you a price on it.
Right.
There are things out there that are collectibles that when you walk into a
No one
store,
wants it.
people will be like, "No, I don't want that." Right? It don't
Yeah.
matter. Right?
Yeah.
So there's that. Right?
Yes.
However
Absolutely.
low the value he had undercut you by,
Mm-hmm.
there's still value there.
Absolutely.
Um, and so yeah, so that's one thing. Second thing is it sort of retains its value in terms of fluctuation. So if
Mm.
you're a person that's a little bit more apprehensive on ups and downs of a market,
Mm-hmm.
Magic Steel product doesn't have as much up and down. It doesn't go to the moon and it won't go straight to the bottom,
I see.
right? So if you looked at that as a way of like keeping it stable, you're okay, right? Like buying, it's like buying bonds, right?
Yeah.
I'm not even qualified to say that. I don't even know what bonds really deep, like I know what they do, but I can't say what they do
Right.
because I don't have any education behind it. But
Yeah.
it's like a safe product, right?
Or
From what
like a
we've been
stable
told, right?
coin, maybe.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I
Not
don't even know.
even. I don't
Yeah,
know.
not even. Yeah. So that's some people's arguments out there
Sure.
is that
Yeah.
they see it as one, no matter what, I can offload it somehow, right?
Sure.
Two, it's not gonna fluctuate like one day really high, one day really low.
Right.
And that's important to some people,
Yeah.
just because they don't want to see this product go down to zero.
Yeah.
So that's what I've been looking at while you've been explaining your
Right.
position on this. Is that yes, the price of a core that specific set we're talking about, the core 2020, it hasn't gone up to the moon. Unfortunately, one way or another, right? It's
Yeah.
got some good cards in that
Sure.
set too, but I digress. The point is that it didn't drop to zero either during this time,
Right.
right?
Right.
It went from like when you buy it online, if you want to buy one online right now, it's $140, right?
Sure.
So for the 5 years that you had held it for, if you were a commercial like retail store, it's gone up by 30 to 40%, which is great, in a
Mm-hmm.
5 year time frame, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
that's like averaging 7 or 8% a year. That's pretty good. But as a person that owns one box or two, right,
Mm-hmm.
or very few in comparison to the other stores that hold like hundreds out
Yeah.
there, you're not going to get a very good price, and you don't have the time, like you said, to wait on selling this
Absolutely.
slowly.
Yeah.
So it doesn't quite work out that way.
Yeah.
Which I totally agree. Like
To be fair, if I
fine.
was
Yeah.
more suave with picking the right set instead of, because I can't even remember why I picked those two sets. I think maybe because I there was something in there that I liked and I thought this is
Yep.
cool.
Sure. Yep.
Most likely the case, right? But if I were a smarter trader in that sense, I should have probably picked a set where it was low print. Maybe had but that's brutal, right? Because if it's low
No,
print,
but you had to guess. Like, I mean, low print doesn't necessarily mean it's good either. There's been low
I know
prints that were crappy
bad
sets.
cards.
Like,
Yeah.
like you have to, you have
Yeah.
to take a gamble on some of these things if you are looking for it for a return.
Well, yes. And
Yeah.
I think to that point, the newer secret layer cards, the ones where you have to buy it online directly from Wizards of the Coast, and they
Right. Yeah.
come in like a set of like, I don't know, it was like 5 special cards with like, like foil, or some. I think some of them come in
They're
non-foil now.
themed. They're themed. Like some of them
Yes,
have artists that have
collab.
done really nice art, or it's
Hmm.
part of like a movie, like Evil
Right.
Dead, or
Yes.
they're like Monty Python.
Hmm.
They're all themed for different
Yes.
crossovers. Yeah.
Yes, and they're legit cards. You can actually use them to play, or you can
Right.
collect.
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
interestingly enough, like originally when I first saw them, I'm like, oh, that's neat. But it wasn't clear to the market right away whether they would hold value. I think a lot of people speculated that it should, because relatively speaking, they're limited print runs. And
Hmm.
presumably, if it was a collab, as long as they don't redo the collab or they don't reuse the same art at least,
Yeah.
then those cards would hold a certain amount of value. And
Right.
and from what I've seen, like after years later, like they still have those secret layer sets that come out. They do hold
Yeah.
a certain amount of value, which is neat, right? But I think the key point here is you're better off getting credit if you're selling it, assuming you want to keep using that credit to trade up to get better cards or different cards for yourself, right? For my perspective.
Um.
Oh,
Yeah, sorry. Sorry. One quick thing about the
uh-huh.
secret layer stuff. So there was a couple of them that flopped.
Oh, okay.
So yep, that didn't do very well. Nobody wanted them.
Oh,
They're so even with these like so-called limited sales, they've also been tweaking it and trying to understand what they could do to make the
uh,
maximum
I
and
see.
also keep the most people happy while making the maximum, right? And
Mm-hmm.
they're still tinkering with it right now. So not all the secret layers actually are of value.
Mm-hmm.
Some are more than others because, like you said, print runs, but some of them just don't work. Um, Sorry, what's the other thing that you were talking about next? You're saying about
I was just surprised that
my bad.
that
Mhm.
well, either way, like ultimately when I went to go sell it and
Yeah.
knowingly that if I wanted cash, it's gonna be 50 cents on the dollar.
Yeah.
I was still like, you know what,
Yeah.
that hurts, right? But
Yeah.
it kind of goes to show that not everything that we put our money into necessarily gives you back the returns that you have in mind, right? And I think that goes for a
Totally.
lot of things. It
Yeah.
really does depend on the market circumstances, how fast you need to exit. And I think that's one of the great things about, at least from what I've seen with Bitcoin, is when you need to exit, there's liquidity. Like you don't gotta wait, right? You jump on
Hmm.
an exchange or whatever, you sell it, it's instantaneous. There's
Yeah.
always someone that's willing to buy. Now, whether or not you're going to get your price that you want, that's one thing, right? And
Hmm.
how fast you need to sell it. But generally speaking, like, if you're willing to sell it at the current market price, there's no wait, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, sure, the exchange that you're using may take a small cut, right? Based off of
Hmm.
margins, but
Yeah.
it's not like you have to lose 50% in order to sell it, right? So
Right.
it's kind of neat to kind of think about it that way. Is like, not to say that, oh well, then Bitcoin's necessarily better. It's not, because to your point, and you've called it out before, is, let's say, even for Magic, regardless of what it sells for, to a lot of
Hmm.
people, they just probably like it because they like it. They don't care if it sells, right? They
Right.
want a card or that set for nostalgic reasons, to enjoy later in life, just to hold or to keep, and they can care less about selling it, right?
Yeah.
um but the one thing that I do to keep myself honest is, I do keep a running tab of all the Magic I've bought,
Yeah.
since the beginning, that that I was introduced to it. And
Hmm.
it's, I it blows my mind. Like, if I didn't look at it, that's one thing, or if I didn't track it, that's another. But the fact that I
Yeah.
track it and I look back, it's pretty mind blowing for a hobby how much
Hmm.
money you could potentially spend and not realize it over time, because it
Oh,
creeps
for
up,
sure.
right?
Yeah.
And that's just like, in this case, Magic's already really good in the sense that you can at least get some money back, right,
Hmm.
on what you put in. So at least
Yeah.
if you were to totally walk away from it, you're not walking away with a hole in your pocket. You could potentially
Right.
get back maybe 50% if you're lucky, or depending on what
Yeah.
was bought or being sold.
Yeah.
But looking back, like the amount I put in, like if I were to think about the year in which I was introduced to Magic, and I had a lot of fun over many years, right?
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
no measurement of that. But if I were to
For sure.
contemplate and say, oh, if I only knew about Bitcoin, or actually, studied Bitcoin at that point in time, and started buying
Yeah.
Bitcoin at that point in time with that amount of money, I it it's kind of hard not to think that it would be at least somewhat life impacting. I wouldn't say life changing,
Yeah.
but like, how Bitcoin is, at least from a historical standpoint, if you look back at that curve, the earlier you started, if possible, right, or a person that starts, and looking back at the years that go by and go, wow, what, like, how much would that be worth now? It's pretty bonkers. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that the future is gonna be the same as what's happened in the past. The past doesn't predict the future, right? We can only hope that there's some rhyme or similarity to it. No one can say for certain that will be the case. It all depends on how much a person studies Bitcoin, and they have to tell themselves whether they think a certain way or not. There's no one to convince you that it's going to go up or down. A person has to make that choice. But just kind of looking at back in hindsight and go, wow, if I actually spent that amount of money on Bitcoin, it may not even be Bitcoin. Could have bought gold, right?
Yeah.
Even gold's gone up, right? So you kind of like, it's like it kind of puts your mind into a different perspective, right? Like
Yeah.
sometimes it's hard to justify because it is a hobby. So it's kind
Yeah.
of like, hey, you love it, right? You're not gonna
Mhm.
really think too much about the amount of money that you spend on it, but it does
Yeah.
play a factor, is what I'm trying to get at.
It does, but I think it's a dangerous thought process, though. Maybe though I
Mm,
feel
that's true.
because if you are looking at it back now, there could be a lot of other investments that you could have
That's
done,
true.
regardless if it's Bitcoin
Yeah.
or not, that could have made a lot of money,
Amazon.
right? Yeah, you
Sure.
could have just stuck into the S&P 500 and
Yeah.
still had a big gain,
Yes.
besides Magic, and you could
Yes.
sell it just as easily
Right.
now as well too.
Right.
It's not just that, and it's tough because Bitcoin at that time hasn't had as long of a track record,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't as widely adopted or looked at as such,
Yeah.
right? And so it would, even if someone did present it to you at that time, telling you like at that very moment you were gonna buy that $100 box, they're like, "Hey man, you should buy this thing. It's much better." Right?
Right.
But at that time,
Yeah.
the people you were surrounded with are telling you like, no, we just want to play this game.
Right.
Like, do you want to play or not? Right?
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
then it's like it's like at some point in time, you could have all the Bitcoin you could ever hold, but you will still need some money to buy food and buy
Oh yeah.
clothing and buy
Absolutely.
shelter,
Absolutely.
and but if it was the what we think it's going to be, like Bitcoin, right? Then
Mm-hmm.
technically you shouldn't be buying those things, and you should just be buying Bitcoin, right?
Yeah.
Because ultimately that's going to get you more food, more shelter, more clothes. But you can't, right? There's a
No.
trade-off,
Yeah.
and that goes with entertainment and happiness. You could
Yes.
forego every single, and I'm speaking strictly about myself, right?
Right. Sure.
Like coffee, meals, going out, trips,
Yeah.
just for like hunker down and not do anything.
Eat
That would
ramen
be the
every
best. I put
day.
every single, yeah, just putting every single cent in, and you can do that. And there's probably nothing wrong with that, and
But it wouldn't be
except maybe
very
your
happy.
family might not be agreeing with you, or
Exactly.
friends, but it's
Extreme.
just like
That's extreme. Yeah.
that's why I say it's dangerous,
Yeah.
because
That's true.
like we have to have a balance, right?
Fair enough.
We had this conversation a few nights ago, which is like, well, what if you're poor, right?
Yo.
Like,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I'm not being mean or
Mm-hmm.
looking down on people
Mm-hmm.
at any level. I'm just saying, like, what if you just don't have any extra money to start?
Mm-hmm.
What do I do? I mean, the argument out there I've heard, right,
Mm-hmm.
is that, well, go find another job or do better, improve yourself, make better for yourself, and then when you have more money, you
Yeah.
should invest,
Yeah.
right?
That's
But
brutal.
there are people that are not in that
No.
aren't in that circumstance. They don't
Yeah.
have the ability to just go and like find a second job or a third job or a fourth job. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
then what?
Hand
Then
to
then
mouth.
then
Yeah.
they can never have any.
Yeah.
And then I think our conversation led us to say that, well, unfortunately, that is the case because,
Mm-hmm.
there are early adopters,
Yeah.
there are not so late adopters, and then there's definitely late and the ones that the so-called the ship has sailed,
Yeah.
try to adopt hers, right? Like they
Right.
can't,
Yeah.
right? And and of course that conversation, we really didn't have like a positive end to it. We just say we can do what we can,
Yeah.
and we kind of left it at that. Yeah.
Because it becomes very negative, right? Like as
Yeah.
part of
Yeah.
life, if we focus too much on the negative, and I think that's to your point, right? Is what if,
Yeah.
what could have been, right? It's kind of pointless
Yeah.
because we have to live in the moment, and we can
Yeah.
use our afterthought or looking back as a would I have done things differently? Maybe, maybe not, right? As you
Hmm.
said, even if
Yeah.
someone were to bring up that topic, I'll be like, whatever, Ponzi scheme. I'm not gonna look into that stuff, right? There's a
That's
lot of
what you would have heard at that moment, right?
sure, yeah, because that's
From
yeah,
yeah.
that's the that's the thing that floats around the most, right? Even
Yeah.
today, a lot of people still think, oh, that's a scam, right? Why do you
Yeah.
talk
Yeah.
about that stuff? So it hasn't changed as much, so to speak, in the general
Yeah.
populace, but there is a
Hmm.
growing community where people are able to call out, no, these are the reasons why it's not a Ponzi scheme, and these are the reasons
Yeah.
why that there's a huge potential here. And we're
Yeah.
seeing it too, right, with the
Of
mass
course.
adoptions of institutions and ETFs and whatever. But you're right,
Yeah.
like back then in 2017 or whenever it was, like there's just no way, right? Like if you're living in the moment, you're like, oh, this is something I want to do, is entertainment. I want to spend time with my friends and family, and this is what we're going to be playing. Last thing on your mind
Yeah.
is like buying Bitcoin or whatever else that you think, right? Because again, how extreme are we going to take things? Are we not going
Yeah.
to
It's tough.
eat or not going to enjoy life? And I don't think that's healthy. I think what we're both getting at is there needs to be a
Hmm.
balance, right? I,
Yeah.
I don't care how hardcore someone is, whether it's in Bitcoin or something else. They need
Hmm.
to balance out their life so that they get the right amount and proper food, health,
Yeah.
um,
Hmm.
nutrition, right? And
Yeah.
making sure that they're able to look after not just themselves, but if they have family members as well. That's priority number
Yeah.
one, right? Shelter,
Yeah.
food, and then if you have excess, then you start looking at what to do with that excess. But
Yeah.
ultimately, there really isn't much. Now, again, that's not to say that for folks that have done well, regardless of whether it's Bitcoin or not, they definitely should look into helping back in the community. And I think a lot of Bitcoiners,
Mm.
we're starting to see a trend of that, right? Where they've
Yeah.
kind of like, I came across this amount of wealth, and I'm talking about some OGs potentially. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
anybody who hasn't gone through at least like 3 cycles, I really doubt, right? Like they have that
Yeah.
much to be able to extrapolate.
Hmm.
But you start to see more and hear more of that where they're giving back to the communities. Like, a lot of Bitcoiners.
Philanthropy, right?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Or maybe
Hmm.
they're getting themselves more locally involved, whether it's like on the Peter McCormack, who's
Yeah.
running for mayor in his local town in Bedford.
Right. Yeah.
Like, because the fact that he can't stand it, right? Like how the traditionally the mayor or the governance there, the way they do things, they make business very difficult.
Hmm.
Especially if trying to introduce like Bitcoin, like they're saying no, like you know
Right.
they don't want to or don't want to allow that or whatever. Then the only
Yeah.
way you really can give back is to basically go into a space where you may not be interested in doing. And then for a
Yeah.
lot of people, I suspect that might be politics. No, who wants to deal with
Hmm.
politics? But
Yeah.
when you've gone to a point where you've built up a certain amount of wealth, because assuming he's OG and he's pretty OG,
Yeah.
um,
Hmm.
it allows him to do that, then it would make
Yeah.
sense because I suspect Bitcoiners have that strong sense of pride and critical thinking where they're like,
Hmm.
you know what, it would make sense, just not just for myself to be rich and run off, but to be able to give back to the community and strengthen the community that I live in.
Of
Because you don't
course.
want to
Yeah.
see other people poor while you're enjoying life. Like, I mean, unless you're
Yeah.
sadistic, but most people don't like that, right? Either you
Yeah.
leave and find another place where everybody's rich around you and you pretend all the
Hmm.
bad things in life aren't happening, or you try to
Yeah.
make a difference, right?
Yeah.
And I think a
Hmm.
lot of us, do want to make a difference, right, in terms of giving back
Yeah.
or making things better. Like just seeing the
For
amount
sure.
of homeless people and whatnot, it's just saddening, right? Like there's got
Yeah.
to be better things that can be done for them to help them, rather than simply
Hmm.
say, oh, let's just give them handouts or give them free housing. Okay, sure, you can move them off the streets, but that's just out of your sight. It doesn't mean that automatically they're healthier or better living better lives, right?
That's right.
So there's a bit of that going on too.
Yeah. No, for sure. I mean, not to end it on a down note, but it's definitely something worth thinking about. I think this is what we're mainly here to do, is just kind of contemplate about these different things in society, and how it impacts us, and how do we look at it,
Right.
through our own experience and point of view, right? That's why we're here. That's why we're here talking about it. Is because
Absolutely.
there are things that we don't have the answer to, and nor should we at this point. Maybe, right? Maybe, hopefully, as we get older, we would see more and understand more. But as of right now, we don't have an answer either. We just do the best we can, and we want to share that process, right? So,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Okay.
So should we call it here
Yeah,
for the time being?
we can. Yeah, that sounds good. All right.
Okay. All right. Sounds good.